Prologue. This story is part stories and legend of the Kingdom of Great Change. It is a kingdom where exists an immense forest, the forest of Elvyre. Humans live there in this kingdom. The writings speak of several periods called eras. If we could draw a parallel with the history of Earthlings, or could say that the universe of this kingdom is medieval, with a small area of some fantastic mythology. Is it a world parallel to that of the Earth, or an exoplanet, or bipeds of a humankind have managed to develop this? Well, I don't know. Has everything been invented, or are there really writings that speak to us about this world and that allow me to tell you, to transmit them to you? Can they be useful to us? Also teach us things about our own planet Earth? You, the readers of his stories, will be the only judges. How Titan Fought the Sorcerer Faltache. In the Kingdom of Great Change there was a great ancient and mysterious forest called the Forest of Elvyre. This forest that lays like enchanted, where trees whispered ancient secrets and streams sang sweet melodies, and where Titan lived. His face was woven with green Veronese leaves, and his eyes shone with a golden light, reflecting the wisdom of the ages. Titan had watched over the forest since time immemorial, protecting every tree, plant and creature that lived there. He was the guardian of the natural balance, ensuring that life continued to thrive in this verdant sanctuary. Titan was a forest titan. It is a biped surrounded by vines and branches. It is approximately 276 feet, 84.2 meters, high. Some parts of his body shine. It seems to be made of elements surrounded by twisted and knotted branches. His hands are branches of wood that look like fingers, and other branches and leaves that grow from his face and whole body. It is made of bark but manages to move heavily in the forest, and miraculously, it does it without destroying anything. It is in perfect osmosis with its environment, this forest of Elvyre. The forest of Elvyre takes a large part of the kingdom. It is really huge. Nobody has yet managed to cross it entirely. It has regions that are impossible for a human being to reach, perhaps like a jungle on our planet Earth. It is so dense and impassable for a human being. It is full of animals, birds, insects, and even, some say that one can find or meet fairies, nymphs, and other animals, or be mythical or fantastic. This is also why humans from this kingdom want to go there in this forest. And that in fact, as far as we know, there is only one human village that is set up and tries very hard to survive. This village is called the village of Ossen. It is 3 hours' walk from the tower of the Sorcerer Faltache. Said that sometimes the sorcerer goes to the village to trade or stock up. The tower otherwise is far from everything, inside the forest. Faltache chose this place, not to be disturbed. No one will see him. He knows that the forest protects him from intruders, so he can go about his sorcerer's business without being disturbed. This story begins in the era of the Great Reforms, just after the era of outbreaks. Faltache is a sorcerer of human origin. We do not know very well why he became a sorcerer, but he had, it seems, always had in him magical and supernatural powers. His soul was mysterious. His appearance was always the same, that of a young man, with an important white hair. He had no mustache or beard. His eyes sparkled with malice. He wears loose dresses, but never the same color. Sometimes he had a big hat and often a big stick, which always gave a strange feeling to everyone who looked at him, because he was wrapped in magic. It is also said that he possessed a whole heap of talisman and amulet that he had managed to acquire in line with the years, during innumerable occult or not quest. In the tower also one could find his great library, or there also with time it had happened to collect grimoires. But despite all this he lacked a secret power, that of crossing the ages, of becoming immortal, the ultimate power for him. And the more time he spent the more he sought this power. When one day during one of his readings in the grimoire of the Faltache I found perhaps a formula which could possibly make him immortal, but for this he had to be able to vampirized, finally managed to take all the vitality of a forest, and of course on his tower where he lived stayed in the forest of Elvyre, so why not take all the energy of it, all his life power? For this he had to first create a potion and say a magic formula to start taking all the soul or energy of this forest. He had already tried several times before several recipe or magic formula without success. Maybe this one will be the one. It was from this moment that the kingdom was threatened by Faltache, who sought appropriate all the ancestral life of the forest to become immortal like this one and also to increase its own power. The sorcerer gathered all the ingredients at the foot of his tower and took a huge cauldron that he put on a fire nourished. Once all the ingredients are put in the cauldron, he waited until the cooking time for the mixture to be done finally take effect to be able to drink this potion and cast the spell that began to wilt the trees and to dry the streams, plunging the forest into despair, as well as the village Dawson, which was the only village known to him in this forest where humans lived in osmosis with this forest and nature. The forest began to wither. Nature did not have the same rhythm of life as the human species. For nature the era of the Great Reform meant nothing. Certainly there were seasons, but in no way the human rhythm was in tune with this nature. But at one point, Titan, feeling the danger hanging over his domain, awoke from his age-old sleep. He rose, tall and imposing, his branches extending towards the sky. With a voice that sounded like the wind in the leaves, he called to himself all the creatures of the forest. It was a very long call that lasted many human years. But to bring them all together, he knew that it would take even longer, and during this time the trees began to die, wither, the wetlands to dry up or form into a nauseating swamp. In fact, all around the tower where Faltache lived and concentrically, a dark residue formed on all life, making all vegetable animal life dying. This residue was the form of the dark soul of Faltache, which sucked up all life form, in order to make it immortal, sowing all desolation in its wake. Titan felt more and more the despair of the forest. But to be able to summon all the animals of the forest to invite them revolted against Faltache, and to be able to break the fate which extended in the forest, he had to go in the oldest clearing, where the first seed had sprouted. To then continue to call for help to the entire forest. Once he arrived in this clearing, he continued to call, "My friends, our house is in danger. We must unite to protect our world from Faltache. Each of you has unique talents that together can save our forest." The animals, over time, even if certain at first was fearful, agreed to fight for their house for the forest of Elvyre. The birds, with their piercing sight, serve as scouts. Wolves, with their agility, would form the first line of defense. Bears, with their strength, would be the guardians. And small animals, like squirrels and rabbits, would carry messages and medicinal herbs. And all began to march towards the tower. They had all heard Titan's call. Titan had a plan. He had to find Faltache in order to break the spell and thus go to his turn. First, there were the birds, who were scouting around the tower to try to see where Faltache was. Was he inside his tower or not? We also knew that the closer we stayed to the tower, the more likely it was that the black soul of Faltache would stain us with its residue, and that because of this we would end up losing our lives. The only hope against this was not to stay too long in the dead zone that Faltache had managed to create and which stretched all the days around the tower a little more each day. And thanks to the birds it was discovered that in fact Faltache was not in his tower but close to a cauldron filled with a potion. He stood like a statue and lazed, now immortal, but fixed like this. Had he actually lost his life? He seemed unable to move. Could he no longer really? His body was itself coated with this evil substance. He was lazy, bigger than before, his body had tripled in volume. From the cauldron came out this evil smoke, which without releasing everywhere ending up creating like a fog, even the birds had difficulty to see and explored the area. Many end up crashing to the ground. Once all his information collected by the birds was transmitted to Titan, he told all those who followed him to continue moving forward. Because now it was necessary to reach the tower as quickly as possible, to be able to reach Faltache and to finally break the spell, because time did not play in our favor. So everyone was heading for the tower, passing through this dead zone that surrounded the place. This area was shrouded in a dense fog and now seemed perpetual, so the light was filtered by this mist. The trees that remained were only dark branches intertwined. The air was heavy, laden with a smell of mold and damp earth, like blackish mud. All the trees around us, from this lazy area, had aged 1,000 years, covered by this dark and strange substance. All their branches were like crooked fingers, scratching the sky in a gesture of despair. The soil had become either swampy, or filled with black or dark mud. It seemed that even so strange creatures had ended up invading all the area. Sometimes they could see their eyes shining, it seems, they were watching us. We also heard their whispers and their cries that tore the dark sky, were they cries of distress, of fear, or to warn us of our arrival in Faltache. In any case, it seems, they did not seem to attack us. Perhaps they too were despairing not this desolate universe, or they were now forced to live. Under our feet, the crackling of branches, the quivering of leaves and the lapping of stagnant water compose a macabre melody. Sometimes a distant cry tears the silence, reminding those who are listening that this place is not for the living. Provided that one day we can put everything back as it was before, said Titan. This area was horrible to cross. There was really a morbid atmosphere. Besides, animals began to darken, certain gave up, others succumbed. Filled with this dark layer on turn their body, how much would it disappear before reaching the tower? It took many more days before the first line of the animals, the most advanced, finally reached the tower. The ones on the front line were wolves and bears. They came out of nowhere and ended up overwhelming the area where it was the cauldron, and eventually toppled the cauldron with all its substance that spread on the already black ground. Like a poison, the liquid continued to release toxic fumes into the air, continuing to touch and invade the forest more beautiful. How to break the spell? The liquid even eventually reaches certain bears and wolves, changing them instantly, covering their whole being with this famous substance. Titan was still far from the area where the tower stood. He continued to advance in this direction, accompanied by the most fragile beings of this forest, who also wanted to be part of this fight. After all a day of walking, all the animals and Titan reached the goal. It was then that Faltache, surprised by so many animals who were all against him, could not contain their revolt. He still makes it alive, looking for magic formulas to fight them all. He ended up destroying a few, but nothing, or did they were there in too many. All revolted against him. Then Titan advanced towards Faltache, and from his aura of leaves glistening a wonderful light from the depths of his soul. He reached out to the sorcerer and uttered an ancient incantation, turning Faltache into a sorcerer in love with this forest. "You will be the guardian of this forest, Faltache," said Titan. "You will learn to cherish the life you sought to destroy." The forest was saved, thanks to Titan and all the solidarity of all the beings of the forest, from the smallest to the largest, because all have their role to play in this forest. But paradoxically, Titan's eyes became lifeless, and even if he still saw, he now had an empty look, as if lifeless. Titan made sure that all the trees became a refuge for birds and small animals. Peace and harmony were restored, the forest became as before, and the forest continued to thrive under the vigilant protection of Titan. Faltache made him become immortal, for all his life now depended, as for Titan, on the liveliness of the forest of Elvyre. As long as it continues to prosper, he too would live. Somehow, he ended up being tied to her and dependent on her. And so to become immortal, his dearest wish. Faltache will remain alive in his tower. A little squirrel who had gone all the way pitted for the sorcerer also decided to stay alive with the sorcerer. He ended up becoming the familiar of Faltache and also bound to the forest indefinitely. And so, the legend of the Titan grows, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, unity and courage can triumph over malice or stupidity. Titan eventually returns to his sleep, knowing that the forest was safe again. But legend has it that if the Elvyre forest is threatened again, then Titan will wake up to protect the nature he loves so much. Small aside, during the devastation of the forest by the spells of Faltache, all the human beings of the village fell ill. This period was called the Dark Age. And in one of his houses in the heart of this village was born a baby named Elvyre. The parents of this baby died of the disease caused by this epidemic, and the life of this baby became precarious. He ended up being saved by druids who lived at the edge of this forest. They take charge of this child as their own child. Since that time, after the village of Ossen was devastated, no longer any human wanted to come back to live in this forest, thinking that it no longer had their place in it. Text written by Stéphane PRUVOT May 2024.